Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. And I'd ask that we begin our meeting by pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business, I'd like to welcome our newest member, Bobby O'Keefe, who's no stranger to town politics. And looking forward to working with you over the next couple of years, I hope.
Or longer.
Yeah. So why don't we go around the table and just introduce ourselves so Bobby has some idea who we are.
Chuck Courts.
Okay.
Adrian Guerrero.
Phil Levine.
Okay, Justin. So I'm not going to ask you 60 questions or anything. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
No, it's just good to be back.
Good.
You didn't want this sheet of questions?
So I passed out an updated membership information form. And Bob pointed out that I did not add .com at the end of Gmail. So if you are emailing Bobby, you want to make sure that you put that .com in.
As soon as you put it in, you think he's gonna change his
Right.
email.
Which is true.
All right, we've got two sets of minutes to approve. The minutes of November 8th, which was the meeting that we held right before the town meeting. So it was a short meeting, but it was an eventful meeting for a meeting before the town meeting.
We did more business there than we did in the other town meetings. I don't think it's appropriate for me to motion that.
All right, entertain a motion from somebody else.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 8th.
All right, motion made by Mr. Courts. Have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Levine. Any questions or discussions on the minutes? All right, hearing none. We'll take a vote on the minutes. Ms. Levine?
Aye.
Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
Dr. Boyd?
Aye.
Mr. Courts?
Aye.
All right, and Mr.
I will
People
abstain
have to
since I wasn't in
abstain.
attendance.
Chair votes aye, so that's a 5-0 to 1 abstention. And November 9th,
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 9th.
motion made
Second.
and seconded by Mr. Courts. Any discussion on the minutes of November 9th? All right, hearing none. Mr. Levine?
I will abstain.
Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
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 I'll abstain.
And the chair votes aye, so that's a 4-0 to 2. Okay. We have the year-to-date reports. Joanne included in them a little cheat sheet to look at a few things that she was explaining. She also included the updated transfers or additions to the budget based on the actions taken at the town meeting in November. We also have in there a report from Chief Smith, Fire Department, to town manager. Joanne had pointed out to him that the overtime and the fair houseman accounts were at a higher percentage than they should be at this time. Of course, with the situation we had last year, people are watching it pretty carefully. You notice that Tom had pointed out that he's got a man out again. There was a retirement, and they cover a retired person so they can replace them. So he's got some reasons to be running a little bit over on those two accounts at this point in time.
When you spoke with Mrs. Gogan on this, like he has the pay periods and he has the people and how many hours they have gone over, that's a significant chunk of overtime change, as well as shift coverage, spare account change. And I'm wondering, because these people all have their regular 48-hour shifts a week, 224s, which is 40 hours plus 8 hours of overtime. So every hour they do is overtime, even if it doesn't come out of the overtime budget, it's calculated that way. It seems like we should be having more spares or more relief firemen, because I don't see anything posted that they're in need. There's no job openings posted.
Well, it sounds like they must have opened something for that retirement.
Yeah, but it's not, like, where is it listed?
Um,
Like, until interviews were held and a replacement was hired, but,
He was using overtime for that.
yeah.
And the spare, as I understand it, we started on the spare husband, but,
Yeah.
you know, it's again, a position that's got to be filled because they're down a firefighter, and will be until until May. One of the questions I've got is does workman's comp work into this? Considered a on-the-job injury?
You would think so.
You would think so. So that's a question I've got for.
But it's not adding up, because if we have one person, excuse me, one person out, they do 2 24-hour shifts, which is 48 hours.
Yep.
So each of these pay periods should be 2 48-hour sections, right?
Excuse me, Tom, would you actually have copies of these? 'Cause I don't believe I was sent this document.
Okay, no, you weren't, because
Oh.
you didn't get it, you didn't get
There
a
was no
packet.
packet at the police station for you, was there?
Well, there may have been, no one told me to go to the police station and get it back.
I put that in my email.
It was
to
in
say
the
that-
email,
that
yeah.
We send them out to the, on Thursday before the meeting, they go to the dispatcher's office.
So you should pick them up Friday, but sometimes they're late Thursday.
Yeah. So you don't have any of these?
Right.
I don't either, so. That makes.
Did you get
Oh, because
these?
you didn't get it in your
Huh?
packet?
I didn't get the year-end date stuff, but I got everything else.
You got this
Where?
from the explanation of the.
No, I didn't get that either.
And the update on that?
How many pages? I could walk to the copy.
No, that doesn't look
Yeah.
clear.
It's just two? Okay.
No,
You
page.
can
I
make
think
some
you
copies.
stuck
it in.
Thank you.
Oh, Rick, do
I
that one
got,
for me too, because it's the cover sheet that explains it all.
I got this, I got this, and this.
Well, that's
Is
an
that what
older.
we just gave them?
Yeah,
You know what, I bet you there's two,
it's got my highlights
Oh,
on
did
it.
they not see
Two
the
on
other
this.
one, maybe?
because I sent this stuff out, 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Did they not see the new one maybe for him?
You
No, I
got
think
No,
them
I was
before.
getting updated.
Yeah.
I
I
mean, I was
bet you there's
getting
2 envelopes, and he asked for the envelope, and.
I bet you they just gave you one.
Yeah, because these aren't in our packets, these were in, I bet you it's down,
Oh,
I think, Adrian, I'm guessing, but
oh, okay. Yeah, I
if you went in
didn't-
and asked for a packet for Adrian Guerrero, and there were 2 packets,
Yeah.
and that's the old one.
Took the first one.
They took the
then-
first one they saw and
Oh.
gave it to you.
Yeah,
Oh, so,
I will bet it's
okay.
there.
Yes, I don't know how they file them behind the counter, I'm assuming it's just in
They're all just sitting there. The first
Yeah, just-
name they come to is, there you go, and they don't
So
keep
they don't-
looking.
They don't keep looking.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and you wouldn't expect there to be 2.
Well,
But I
yeah,
think it was shortly after our first meeting when I sent out that information, it's the report on the water sewer system.
I mean, it was interesting reading,
Yeah.
I did enjoy reading.
Yeah,
it.
okay.
So, but.
That's what happened. I'm sure that's what happened. Probably, yours might be there too. Although, I gotta confirm the fact that they added it to the list. It certainly might not have added it to the list.
Yeah.
But we'll make sure you get copies of all this stuff. That's not fair. All right.
So when I'm looking at these, pay period 3 is 70 extra hours. Pay period 4
Thank you.
is,
Yeah, you gave it. You made your copy.
pay period 4 is 84 hours. Like, everyone is different. If you're covering for the same person, shouldn't they all be the same?
Well, the shifts are different too.
Well, those 2 48-hour shifts. Yeah, so I'm looking
I
at
mean,
4
some people
hours
did 12 hours. some
and
people
14
did-
hours, but the total should be those 2 48-hour shifts per week. So it was mind-boggling to me. I just don't,
Well,
I guess after last year, I'm done.
Well, yeah, I mean, I you know, I
because it will
hope
have said
that
in there that he didn't include in the spreadsheet for the retirement. So I think it would only be 1 shift, not 2.
But that doesn't add up.
But it still doesn't,
No,
no.
it doesn't add up at all.
No, so, but, and
So
so
it's
to
like-
me, that's even more scary from the
Yeah.
perspective of, he didn't include the coverage,
The
the
coverage.
Benry coverage of the retirement.
Oh, I see. So
Yeah.
you're looking at.
This retirement is not included on the spreadsheet. These
Right.
shifts also needed to be filled until interviews were held and a replacement hired, but we haven't had any job posting. How can we hire and fill without a job posting?
I asked, what is IOD?
Another question, yeah. Because he talks about IOD situations.
I couldn't,
I tried to figure that
They have
out.
more than
I
one.
did too, I couldn't figure it
I got overtime, and then it says fair and overtime for IOD. So is this something about the fellow that's off on sick leave? Is that some kind of an acronym for that?
Next page, as part of the titles, IOD.
Yeah, because the first line, the Excel spreadsheet detailing the personnel costs directly relating to the IOD of firefighter medic who has been out since July 28th.
Injured on duty.
Injured on duty. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, and he says that the retirement was not included. in
Yeah,
the spreadsheet.
yeah, so it's, when I look at the numbers, my mind boggles, because it's just, it does not make sense.
Yeah. Well, one, appreciate the fact that you brought this to our
Yeah.
attention, this stage of the game instead of waiting till later.
But I'm not sure it's being mitigated.
But that's the other question. I think that's obviously, a message that we think that the town manager would want to bring to him is to see, since he knows at this point of the game that he's going to run into some problems.
Yeah, 'cause
As
we're
he
all-
did last year,
yeah.
you know, he squeezed the other accounts and tried to come up with some of the money. It's,
So maybe that should be on your tickle list to talk with the town manager
Yeah.
about to see where we're
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
sooner than later.
We can meet with him and Tom.
Yes,
Should be the easiest thing to do, I think. Most effective way of dealing
Yeah.
with that.
because I looked at the police reserves and the DPW, but they were not nearly as concerning as this.
Yeah, and he seemed to have, could recover that with
Yeah,
his overtime funds.
and I look at the other accounts and they're good for police and DPW, but for fire,
Yeah, I mean, to be at 50% of your overtime,
it's frightening.
this stage of the game, the end of November, it's running ahead of schedule.
Mhm.
Tom Smith, who is this? Tom Smith?
Yeah,
What department are we talking about?
that's the fire department.
Fire department, okay.
Yep. Yeah, I had a few questions to the school department. I'm thinking that, Phil, I'll make a contact
Yeah.
with superintendent and we can schedule a meeting. Mostly it's around accounts that hasn't had anything spent. So, you know, the question is,
I had those.
are they offering the program or not offering the program?
He actually took, for the first time that I've ever seen in 7 years, he took the year-to-dates at the last school committee meeting, gave one to each of the members and went through it line by line with them to try to educate them on what to look for and where he's at. And some of the things like secretaries that had zeros and other secretaries that had more, he said, these are line item transfers due to retirements, but he was waiting till all 3 were completed before giving it to Joanne. And he was well aware. It was really nice to hear somebody on top of it, being proactive with the school budget and understanding it.
Well, was he a business manager before, I thought he alluded to?
I think he was, I think in Lowell.
Yes, perhaps he has that background.
I'm not sure if he was the BA or he took the courses to be the business manager. Could be in- Yeah, because he's very interested in that, yeah,
Is he principal?
in principle, yeah.
Okay. Well, he certainly,
But it is a passion of his. But it
did
was
a
kind
good job
of,
in terms of explaining it. I know what we did, what we did is decide that we would try to meet every month or 2 months with the superintendent. And Phil's kind of taken on that responsibility, he and I are doing that. Just to make sure if we got questions, we could get them out there. And I would say that, you know, he's usually got a good answer for it, to be aware of something. And it was his initiative really to say, you know, I could use this to help educate the school committee so that they've got a better handle on the finances and can ask some of the questions themselves.
No, I actually think such a meeting is very important. When you look at numbers, they're not always meaningful.
no.
You know, a line item that hits 100% before September the 1st
That's it, yeah.
is a very
Why?
typical thing.
Right?
You know, as long as you know, that means all the purchases or encumbrances
Yeah.
for the entire fiscal year have already been done.
Prepaid, yeah.
Other line items, we may not see hit
That's right.
closer to the end of a fiscal year.
Especially with the school department, their spending is different.
Yeah.
There's-
Buy 90% of your supplies at the beginning of school.
Correct.
Well, but sometimes too, like with special ed and transportation, they're like in 300,000 and 400,000, but that's money's coming back from the feds and states, and we don't get it in a timely manner, really.
Yeah.
So it looks like we're over, but we're not, but he at least understands it.
Yeah. And Joanne had some good explanations just about the questions we might have had about the town
And I
side.
appreciate her doing that again.
Yeah.
I really like her little errata sheets.
And then the enterprise funds at this point in time, I was looking at the water user rates, and we're at 33%. Pretty much the same, I think, with the sewer user rates, 34%. So I think that's a healthy number at this time of year.
I sat down with Brian Croto after our town meeting, after our last finance meeting as well, because some things were said at town meeting that I was a little concerned and confused about, especially the metering of water and the flushing of hydrants, and the parks and the cemeteries, and the implication there was they were not metered. The only place that is not metered in town is the town cemetery. There is not a meter on that cemetery. There is on the Catholic cemetery. There is not water at the parks. There is a meter at, or there was a meter at Old Ingleside because of the house.
Yeah.
The flushing of the hydrants, they know approximately how many gallons per hydrant it takes to flush it. So that's built into their maintenance budget. So it was stated by a resident that the people that own houses and you know, pay for water, pay for that, they don't. That is the general town budget, so all taxpayers pay for that. And so we had a good meeting for that. And he said to date, they have found 3 homes that they've bypassed the water meters, because apparently it's pretty easy to do if you're a little bit savvy. And they, of course, it comes up 0 usage and you know right away, so they did charge them, and it was a $2,000 or $3,000 fine, so it was significant, and then it goes back up. That's why they would prefer the new meters, because it will automatically come up on the computer if there's any glitch, and then it can check it out.
I think the thing that's confusing sometimes with the water issues is, we think of it as a business model. We think, well, if we're selling you water, we're paying for it somewhere else. We don't really buy the water. We pay for the infrastructure that it takes to deliver the water to everybody's house. So when you flush a toilet, flush a hydrant, how many gallons of it? It's as though somebody was saying, well, that's a quarter of a gallon, you know, who's paying for that? Nobody's paying for that. It comes through the system that gets it to the house, gets it to the hydrant, gets it to, it's got to go. People look at the budget for the water department. Everything there has to do with people who work there, paying people who work there, equipment, treatment materials, all of that. But you'll not find anything on a line item that says water. You know, we're not buying the water. So anyways, I think that concept is what confuses a lot of people. It makes it a little bit difficult to understand how that enterprise operation works.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
There's some properties, you mentioned, at least one cemetery that doesn't have a meter.
That's our town cemetery.
How is the water used there accounted for if there's no meter?
It's paid for then by the town, because it's metered coming out of Ashburnham, so they know how many meters come to Winchendon.
But I'm talking about that cemetery, for example. How do we know how much water is used at that cemetery?
We don't. There has to be a meter put in there. It's just, it's the
Right.
cost right now.
Because
So
without the meter, the only people paying for the water use at the cemetery are the enterprise ratepayers.
no, because the town budgets for maintenance. And so that's part of the maintenance budget that they pay in the contract. Because that's what I was talking
Are
about.
you saying that payment doesn't come out of the enterprise fund?
No, it doesn't come out of the enterprise fund, it comes out of the, from what I understand from Mr. Croto, and we might have him come here, is that the town pays a portion of the water plant and Ashburnham pays a portion.
Right.
So the metered water comes out and they know how many gallons are.
Yeah, my understanding is very different.
And so,
Since I was,
if it goes into the home, you're paid for that, because your meter at your home says how much you pay. But the maintenance of it is part of the town's
that's where I'd be unclear.
Because
When I was on the board of selectmen.
that's why I asked him, because that was the implication for a couple of the members of the board, therefore some of the members of the public, and they said, no, it's not that way. Because it's just like flushing the meters. The town budgets that.
I would disagree on that as well.
Well,
I would
he
say the
said they-
enterprise fund covers that.
He said they budget for it, and they pay that into the fund, because they know how many gallons of water they use to flush meters. So it might be an idea to have them come
And we
and
could
tell
look at the
them.
town budget to see that. I would not see that.
It's part of his maintenance budget. He said it's not a separate line item, but it's part of his maintenance budget.
His maintenance budget that is paid for out of the enterprise fund, not out of the general fund.
That's not the impression he gave me. So that would be a
I
good
think that we
question.
do have to clear, because we
Yeah.
both have a different
Yeah,
impression,
'cause-
and one of us.
Because
has
that's
the
why I
right,
went,
we
like,
don't
I went with
know.
a whole list of questions, and I said, talk to me about this, because that was what was stated at town hall, was that the users pay for the water, the meter flushing. And he said, no, 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 that's part of my maintenance budget.
But the-
He said, I pay for that.
Everything he would pay for, my belief is really the enterprise fund is paying for. And
See,
flushing,
that's not what I got, so.
flushing of the meters should be paid for by the ratepayers only, not the general people, because they don't participate in the system. Why would they pay for the maintenance of the system?
But they participate,
They
they
do.
participate if they're, in terms of fire hydrants.
Yes,
If they have fire hydrants.
Fire
sure.
hydrants are there for everybody.
Yeah.
Not just the users. So it's a town expense.
yeah.
It's not like, the water goes to the school, so the water goes to
Mhm.
town hall. It's metered, it's in the budget, and it's paid for in the budget. The school has a water and sewer bill.
Correct.
Fire department has a water and sewer bill, town hall has a water and
Mhm.
sewer bill. And all of those expenses are paid for by everybody in town.
That takes back to my original point, though, is there's a cemetery unneeded. The enterprise is not paying for that water, they aren't paying for the water. The general fund isn't paying, just the people that pay for water and sewer are the ones actually paying for the water at the cemetery.
No, you're only paying for the water that goes into
It's
your
your
house.
house.
You don't pay for anything other than that. That's what I'm saying, is that the water doesn't have a specific cost.
I mean,
You-
I'm sorry that we're into this on my first night, because it sounds
Yeah, why-
almost like a game of semantics, though, because while there isn't a specific cost for what we buy, it's not like the supermarket that buys a loaf of bread for $1 and sells it to us for $2. There
Right.
is actually a specific cost of water. It is the total cost of maintenance and our share of the Winchendon-Ashburnham
Right,
fund. Right.
Right.
And there is a cost there.
yep,
That cost is less than what ratepayers pay, and the difference is really the maintenance.
Supposed to be, but it hasn't been used for maintenance.
Mhm.
It's been used to offset the rates. So like for water, $398,618 from retained earnings that should have been used for maintenance is used to offset the rates. And another 81,000 from free cash, which is all taxpayers.
Yeah, retained earnings, I would agree.
To balance.
Enterprise fund retained earnings.
Right.
Free cash, I definitely would not necessarily agree, because that's everybody in town.
That's right, and they had to pay and 194,000 for sewer to meet the needs. So they are paying for it. But again, I think we should have Brian here, because when I spoke to him and I asked him who paid for the flushing, he said, that's general, but my maintenance general budget, I factor that in so that I can pay that. So,
well,
Yeah,
if-
but someone
I
like
think as
Brian
we
would
move
help.
down this road, certainly, I think, asking Brian to come in
Yeah.
and be able to answer these kind of specific
yeah,
questions.
I think it would be a
Because
good idea.
we've all got a perspective of
yeah.
what we think it is.
Yeah.
And we'll have a chance to talk about this.
Does that include the VA cemetery also? Or
What?
the VA cemetery?
No, they're metered.
Oh,
They're all metered, yeah.
Okay.
The only one that's not is the town one. And when he wanted to put one in there, they said, it's minimal water usage for the cost of the meter. We have other uses for our money, so they didn't allow him to put it in.
Be worth doing.
That's kind of hard to budget
It is,
if you don't know.
yeah,
If you don't know,
Right,
you don't know what the
Right.
usage.
right. And what's the right number?
Yeah.
yeah,
You know, whether it's in your maintenance budget or whatever,
Yeah.
what's the right number?
yeah.
How do you know?
You could put a meter in and say, we're not charging for the first year, so you can learn what it will be in
Yeah.
future years.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
That's good.
makes sense.
Thank you.
No.
But that's a good perspective, because it's, it is. It's totally opposite from what my understanding was. So it'd be good to find out where it really is.
So the next item on the agenda is the proposed reserve policy amendments update. A quick update. I presented them to the town manager, and he suggested we put them on the agenda for the tri-board meeting next month. So we'll be presenting that particularly to the board of selectmen,
Right.
the ones who would vote on policy, adopt policy, and not adopt policy. Just a quick update, Barbie, one of the documents I gave you was our fiscal policies. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we put together a series of fiscal policies that was adopted by the board of selectmen. What we did at the town meeting was ask the town to fund some of our reserve accounts, and with the intent of us to come up with some policy as to how that funding would continue over time. So we've got the stabilization fund, we've got an OPEB fund that really has been not funded at all in the past, and then a fund for what we call contractual obligations. And so in the last page of that.
Did you get that?
Yep. With the policies there is the language that we've proposed to amend those policies and add language as to how they would be funded in the future. It's one thing to say you're going to have a fund. We've had an open fund policy for 6, 7 years now. Nobody's ever put any money in, so we've proposed that there be a specific way of including money in the operating budget based on the health insurance premiums. So 2%, 3% of the health insurance premiums goes into that account, the OPEB account, which is a trust.
All new employees are not getting sick time by them, correct? And when I was on the board of selectmen,
Not supposed to.
there was
The
nobody
only-
being
right.
added for approximately 12 a
Yeah,
year.
there's, for sick time, you're right. Sick time right now, the only union, I think, that still has sick time is the policemen's.
Not the fire department? I thought there was 2 left on the fire department.
Police and the dispatchers.
And is it only the most senior, the people that
And then the
were there
people
before
grandfathered
that dated
who
time?
Yeah,
had,
the
when they were
grandfathered,
hired,
yeah.
there's only half a dozen of them or so.
Yeah.
So for the most part, we did a study on that, take a look and see just what the exposure was of everybody. And the sick time is coming off, slowly coming off the books. Still a big item with the police and the dispatchers.
So therefore, the open exposure is shrinking,
Yeah,
but it is important. I recall one year, 3 very long-term employees retired in the same year,
yeah.
and it was, a multi-6-figure number that we had to account for that wasn't in the budget.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a reserve fund.
You
So
can't
we have
go
to
with
back
that,
to
right.
town meeting,
Yeah.
and these people retired and didn't get their check until many months later.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, every time it happens, we all wring our hands and say, why
But
are
we
we
know
putting
it's
some money
coming.
away?
We know it's coming.
So the idea is that, town voted to put $50,000 in this year. And our proposal is to add 50 each year until it equals the amount of money that's exposed.
Actually, there was no pushback on any of those. They all understood it. That was good.
And stabilization and the contractual obligations would come out of free cash. But the OPEB would be budgeted out of the operating budget. So there'll be some discussion around that. We'll have a little presentation for the other boards.
The royal we is Tom.
Committee.
Yes.
All right, enterprise funds
We kind
discussion.
of did that, didn't we?
So I just to kind of walk through this a little bit, Mo and I have been working on it, I think from a different starting point.
Yeah.
Was a little project to take a look at the last 6, 7 years of the water and the sewer enterprises. So we can begin to kind of look for some trends and look for some things that might give us some answers as to how did we get to this point of having to take hundreds of thousands of dollars out of free cash to balance the enterprise fund. I'll just walk you through a little bit. If you take the top set of numbers is the water department. And the expenses, somewhat self-explanatory, starts off at FY15 at $840,927. And then FY16 is a big jump, 17.6%. And the main reason for that jump was that indirect costs increased dramatically that year. And what Joanne told me is that prior, FY15 and prior to that, the indirect costs were pretty much administrative costs. Portion of assessor's office, the treasurer's office, several offices that would go into the administrative costs. In FY16, they added the personnel costs of the personnel that worked at the water department and the sewer department too. So the reason it's up $160,000 is that is essentially what the cost of those employees were, and the feeling was that those employees should be paid. There should be the responsibility of the enterprise fund if they're working on the water. And I know at that time there were some employees that worked part-time at the water plant, worked part-time at DPW, so they were splitting things up. They were taking like a percentage of the department head's salary. So all of those things added up to a pretty good jump in the expenses. Beyond that, moving down through up until FY21, the annual increases have been about 3%, pretty much averaging about 3%. So the next thing I looked at were the revenues. And with the revenues, there's a big jump from FY16 to FY17. And I'm not sure why. I don't know if, I tried to line it up and see if it coincided with the water rate increase. It might have, because there was an increase around FY18 in that area. So I'm not sure what caused that increase, but it occurs for both the water department and the sewer department. And then the next year you see that the revenue started to drop. It dropped about 1%, and then it dropped 16% to FY19, dropped another couple percent to FY20, and then it actually went up a little bit at FY21. The next thing I looked at was to see what was the net difference between expenses and revenues. So you can see that it's 24,000 to the good in FY15, but 92,000 in the negative. That get covered with retained earnings. And then next year there was a profit, next year was a profit. And then the next couple of years, some serious drops in, and we had some negatives, 123,000, 106,000, and then minus 85,000. So the last 3 years has been significant negative balances between expenses and revenues. So the other thing I looked at is what drives the revenues. As we think of the user fees are certainly the main revenue source. But there's also liens and interest. And if you remember back to FY15 and FY16, That's about the same time that the town ran into its problems with the deficit. And one of the things the state Department of Revenue, when they came in and looked at it once and said, you've got to start collecting your taxes, you've got to start collecting your water bills, you can't just let people slide. So there's a real effort to get after people who owed money. And that's when I think the Board of Selectmen approved the policy of giving them a certain amount of time and then shutting off the water if they didn't pay the money. So what you see is that there was quite a bit of revenue driven by people paying up their arrear accounts. 155,000 in 15, 141 in 16, 108 in 17. Then it drops off pretty dramatically.
So wouldn't that sound like forcing people to pay on time actually cost us a lot of money? And the reason, I was one of those people.
Yeah.
I never paid, and I owned quite a handful of buildings in town. I never paid a water or sewer bill. I didn't pay a water or sewer bill for almost 10 years. Now ultimately, of course, I paid. But what would happen is, originally there were bills every 6 months. Not the easiest thing to budget for, even for a lot of families. So you don't pay the bill, and a couple months later, they just tack it on your tax bill. So the town got paid. Your tax bill is paid by your mortgage company. Your mortgage company allows you to budget over 12 months your escrow. So I did it for budgeting purposes. However, there was 90 days that my bills were always late, and the town collected 14% interest for those 90 days. That's why liens and interest were so high.
Yeah.
Now the town is eliminating that, so the town can't collect the interest because they're very aggressive in turning water off. Then the town switched to quarterly bill, which made it a little bit easier for people as well. My preference would be monthly billing. I think that would be perfect for the people to budget. But I had that same argument with the board back a few, my time, that if we force people to pay their water bill on time, we're giving up all that interest. And we made quite a bit of money, and you actually did the math here to prove we're now losing about $100,000 a year compared to 15 to 21 because we can't collect that interest anymore.
Well, I've got the figures, I won't look them up right now, but the interest that they included, I combined the lien and the interest.